So John drives innovation and improvement throughout advanced analytics, automation, and digital product development to ensure SDI's digital strategy is aligned with client and corporate goals. Also important is the fact that they are a new SIG member, new SIG sponsor. They partnered with us on some research, and it's just a nice team, and they're brilliant. So it's a win-win solution for everybody. We also have John Hansen, who's a good friend of SIG. He's the founder and chief editor of Procurement Insights blogs. I'm sure you've seen him all over LinkedIn and social media. He has gained an international reputation for delivering unique and meaningful insight into the procurement world and business through a variety of mediums, including radio and television. So I'm going to let the two of you, if there's anything more you want to share about yourself, this is the time, but we really, folks, submit your questions. We want this to be valuable for everybody. And while you're listening, make sure you put in your LinkedIn link and your favorite football team. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to turn myself on mute and go off camera and take it away.
Thank you, Allie. And John, why don't you go first? Do you want to add anything about yourself that we should know?
Well, I just really appreciate the introduction. Appreciate being here and everyone joining us today. And just to the point of sharing your LinkedIn and football team. I'm a big data evangelist. I feel like all of us in our everyday lives, outside of our workplace, if we just understood data better, we would be able to make better decisions and more informed decisions. So that's why we asked for your favorite football team. I'm a big advocate of fantasy football. It's a way for fun to, practice your skills with data and translate that to your real life, personal life, or if nothing else, back to some great sourcing strategies that are based on data. So I just like to try and make data fun for everybody. And really appreciate, again, being here today. Thanks, John.
Yeah, and you see what's interesting for me, fantasy football was the office sheets where they'd hand them out and you have to pick your winning teams and then submit it with, a few dollars on the side there. And then you'd have your sheet watching diligently on Sundays to see who would win. Not quite as automated, but it was still fun.
It's a lot easier. It's the entry barrier is much lower. You don't have to keep stats all day. You're not keeping baseball games anymore, right?
That's it. Anyway, John, you know what? Let's do this because, you and I had a chance to talk earlier today when we did the test run. And maybe what we can do is set up a little bit of a frame. And I was thinking of this is giving a little bit of background because the overall theme we have here is, you've got great technology is out there, but it's the people and the expertise behind the technology, the passion. So from my standpoint, and we talked about some of my earlier case studies for the Department of Defense back in the late 90s, early 2000 with the algorithms, utilizing data to deliver more efficiently, to make the streamlining of the process. But the key in that is it wasn't the technology, but the understanding of the extended impact of what you're doing. For example, I talked about the fact that the field technicians had a different system and different objectives, and it happened to compete with what procurement was. So if I had done something in procurement, specifically focusing on that without taking into account the service side of the equation, I would not have been successful. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening or disillusionment. Deloitte's came out with a survey a couple of years ago of CPOs saying that the majority are not satisfied with their digital transformation. It's not a technology issue anymore. It's not a no one got fired for buying IBM issue. It's the experience and the knowledge. So one of the first things I guess I'd like to get from you is the understanding of the passion and the insight and the data behind SDI, how you make it happen.
Yeah, and I appreciate, you setting it up, and it's great perspective. To your point, these concepts are not new. You starting in the 90s had done some innovative work with these algorithms and, very high level. And now, to your point, that technology is out there. There's many players. The capabilities exist. What you need is, to your point, the passionate people that have the subject matter expertise to want to solve a problem. It's the reason that, I'm sure we've all seen impressive things with AI, generative AI, or different forms of AI and machine learning recently, but it's the reason we can't all just be replaced with the bots. You can't teach a computer easily that subject matter expertise that you need to really take your data and turn it from a thing that might be collecting dust into, an asset that really, returns value to you. So, the fact that these technicians may be operating not only under different requirements and metrics than procurement, but entirely different systems, right? That's a common problem. The fact that data doesn't always talk to each other across databases. So again, it's not just the subject matter expertise of the people involved in the transactions, but in systems as a company and how those systems integrate. And at SDI, we deploy what we call sort of a control tower approach. And what that means is, any order that processes through our systems, is tagged with some sort of unique identifier throughout the process. It's similar concept to what people talk about, in terms of blockchain, where there's ultimate traceability from beginning to end. In this case, it's just of a transaction, not of the big wide world, but it does involve anything that comes into contact with it. So a technician that places an order, a tracking number that gets picked up along the way, the lead time that it took, the price that we paid. And when you combine all of that and you're able to click one button and see, what does procurement care about? What does the technician care about? What is the, what are the SLAs? Are we meeting them? The fact that those can all combine together with subject matter expertise and data expertise, that's kind of the next frontier. That's what everybody needs, because now there's just so much data available. But if you don't make sense of it, it doesn't mean much, right? So, and it's
what's the old saying? You don't want to boil the ocean. Now, wait, how do we influence services to follow what procurement cares about? Is one of the questions that just popped up. Let's drive this, if I could. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that, and then you have some great slide presentations. Yeah. Yep. But let's go back to the premise, because everyone have always known that data is important. Way back when, garbage in, garbage out, all it is with what your example given, if you don't have that knowledge, it just happens faster. You can't see it. So, for example, when I was talking about the service technicians, they had a system and they had a mandate that they had to get so many service calls in within a certain period of time each day. And rather than ordering a part after each call, which would have made it very efficient for procurement, they would sandbag it until the end of the day. What happened, though, because it was MRO parts or products, is that $100 part would be worth maybe $1,000 by 4 o'clock. We also discovered that 90% of the product was being shipped across the border, which they didn't have clearance on. And so ultimately, you had a contract that required a 90% SLA, only achieving a 51% SLA. And then we looked at it and said, okay, well, these service people are out of our realm. And this goes to your question, how do we influence? You ask questions of the other realm. We went to the service group and we said, well, look, your mandate is based upon performance criteria, KPI, that actually hurts because you're being rewarded for making a certain number of calls, but you're not having the effect of the delay in ordering the products, which drives up costs and diminishes delivery performance. So what do we have to do here in terms of getting in line? Do we change the behavior of that service technician, or do we develop the data in the system within procurement to be able to accommodate that? And of course, that's ultimately what we did with the algorithms. The end result was 51% to 97.3% within 3 to 4 months. Cost savings were significant year over year of 23%. And so I guess when I go back to you on this, John, and this question that's been posed here is, it's not that procurement has to, it's not just what procurement cares about, but it's what the other partners and stakeholders care about. Is that a good starting point to look at data?
Please. Yeah. So, and you said it a little bit in before the question was asked, that you have technicians and procurement having disagreeing metrics, right? So one cares about cost savings and one cares about fixing it in 24 hours. And those are both their primary drivers, right? Well, they can compete. I can get a part faster and it's more expensive. I can get it cheaper and it's slower. Sometimes they'll meet up, but we all know that, hey, you pay for speed a lot of the time, right? So there's that. So when we talk about, back to the question and what you were referencing there, how do we help change the behavior? We found, and again, in our previous discussion, we mentioned it, John, supplier scorecarding and exposing this data and sharing it, and not only making it available for the sake of judging, but making it available for the sake of being transparent. Hey, these are the things that are important across our supply chain, and here's how we measure them. So we developed some scorecarding, and I'm sure some of this speaks to those types of algorithms that you were talking about, and should be sharing my screen here so you can see it. And I'm not picking on anybody. This is just a small data set, and it's anonymized. So none of these spend numbers are real and traceable. But it just goes to show you how a blended scorecard system can help you enhance what you care about. And then we'll also show a quick example of how this sort of thinking was used to help in a real life scenario to bring a client on board. So first one right here, we can see that this supplier here in our supplier scorecard has a blended score of a B. Now you can see they have an on-time delivery. We have two different measures, within 5 days and within first promise. Now, again, we're in the weeds here, but that's okay. This is a procurement group. The reason for the difference, we measure it within 5 days if it's expected to be a stock item that can regularly ship and it's, been committed to. First promised, we measure that if it's a non-stock item, they need to go outside of normal sourcing procedures. So we're more lenient with our grading. That's the difference between the two metrics. Depending on the type of order, one or the other gets weighed. So you can see just right off the bat that, well, this supplier has a B, but they're getting at best a C in their on-time delivery score. Well, how does that happen? Well, on-time delivery makes up a significant portion of this scoring, but it's not everything. It's really important in today's supply chain to have that best-in-class experience where I'm going to get this delivery today, to have additional communication when you place an order. It's not just the pricing and it'll get there in 5 days, trust me. I want a confirmation. I want an advanced shipment notification. With that advanced shipment notification, I want a tracking number so that I could ping that tracking number against FedEx and UPS databases with APIs and say, yeah, that's legitimately going to be there on Thursday. So my technicians who are waiting for parts, they can be deployed and they can say even if they're not out there on Thursday because they don't know the delivery time frame, fine. When they get there on Friday, they know the part's there because they have a tracking number that they trust. It's available in an easy to use application for these people. And that way they're not wasting, window time. They're not driving somewhere and they're waiting for a part. They're not showing up and misinformed on the availability of what they need. And, when you look at specifically in the facilities maintenance, arena, over 70% of delays in work orders not being completed in a single day are due to waiting for parts. It's not because the people don't want to do the work. It's because they're missing that widget that they need to complete the job, right? So, I think that's a really good way to influence the behavior of suppliers, and these are made available, to be clear. So this isn't something we use internally and hide from the world. We meet with suppliers, we share this data, and we make it available. We actually proactively share it along with the supporting data, which is underneath, on a regular basis. So it's a conversation. It's not adversarial. It's, hey, here's how you're doing. And the reason that you can use it to drive behavior is because if you're taking a strategic approach, you can say, hey, in electrical, suppliers that will be considered as my preferred supplier must get a B or an A. If you're a preferred supplier and you fall below a B, we're going to reconsider your spend. And that could have significant impact, orders of millions of dollars of spend, depending on the type of numbers you're working with, right? So it's a really helpful tool in managing that. And again, what's important is different for every organization, but developing a blended score where it's clear what's being measured and where, not just, hey, you got an A, good job, but what are you doing well in? What could you improve? It really opens up the conversation. So at the risk of monopolizing, John, I'll throw it back.
Well, what's interesting about this, and this is the key, and I want to go back to this because everyone talks about data, everyone talks about the tools. We're looking at MRO products, etc. But traditionally in the past, a lot of products, you do commodity characteristics, you then do a process alignment, which what you're talking about, internal and external, and then you look at the technology. But one of the things that I find very, very interesting in all of this is that when you're going out there to the marketplace, a lot of organizations in the past would do what's known as volume purchasing agreements. They would compress the number of suppliers with whom they're dealing. They would then say, we're not only saving times administratively, and I don't know in the audience if your company does this, but we're cutting down administrative cycles and we're negotiating a volume purchasing discount. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's a major retailer out of the US, an IT retailer, and they did a volume discount to their top 100 suppliers. And what was interesting, I'm going to tie this back into your chart, which I think is important, is that what they did is their truth, a single source of truth, became the initial savings was from that 100. They realized it, but their truth was limited to just those 100 suppliers. And as time progressed, they got further and further and further away from the real-time market. Now, what ultimately happened when we went into the assessment of it, what happened is we found out that they were paying about 22% above the going market rate for indirect MRO materials, because what happened is that and you've got to do commodity characteristics, which is what you provide, John. Certain products will go down in price steadily, and usually it's indirect MRO. That's not conducive to having a centrally negotiated contract. So what you want to be able to do is be able to engage with confidence, even more so, the widest number of suppliers. And that's where you're looking at when you're talking about the scorecard and the rating. You're able to, within seconds, track what they've done in the past, align it, and interrupt me if I've got this wrong.
Oh, you're
Align
nailing it. Yep.
if they're wrong, or align it if they're missing something, or you're changing perspective where it isn't price but delivery versus price. You have the ability to engage the widest number of suppliers possible, yet not extending your cycle time or resources. I mean, this is particularly important for tail spend, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you need to have those secondary, tertiary sources available. And what this does, and that was just a scorecard, right? But, we have some other views, which I can pull up in a second, but, that'll show you, are you buying the same part from multiple vendors, as an example? We all know in indirect and MRO, it happens all the time. Manufacturers disguise part numbers, or, you may know that I can use the same manufacturer part number belt, even if it's a different manufacturer, because it's within the specs, right? There's those little nuggets of intel that, again, the subject matter expertise behind helps, but bringing all that data together is a job in and of itself. So having it available in a way that you can research it, it's extremely helpful. And to that point, that scorecard, even though it's, again, shared and, generally worked by supplier relationship and the suppliers themselves, it's available. That's the point of evangelizing this data. Anyone that, works within our company or has access to our analytics can pull up their scorecards. And so hundreds of people have access to that. If there's someone in the sourcing department that they usually run market baskets, but maybe they don't engage with suppliers in the day-to-day, maybe they don't realize that there's another electrical vendor in the game now because we've expanded our breadth, right? To your point, there's always going to be a focus. You're always going to have preferred suppliers. You need some leverage to get good pricing, but at the same time, if you just set your 10 preferred suppliers and walk away, you're leaving a lot on the table.
This is an interesting point, because with the Department of National Defense, where we implemented this in the late 90s, early 2000s, over a 7-year period, year over year, they realized a 23% savings on their indirect MRO material. And again, that's really the key. I mean, it's more conducive to have a volume contract with what we call direct materials, which are more historic flatline, versus the dynamic. But the biggest challenge comes into, how do you engage the wider suppliers to stay in and keep that source of truth valid, and not wake up one day and realize, holy cow, I've been paying $100 for a $5 hammer. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying?
But not really. It can happen.
Yeah. But now let me ask you this, and this is something that I think they'll be interested in our audience. I mean, we now have new ESG legislation, etc. From what I gather, today's systems versus the basic algorithms that I employed that covered a number of categories. Sure. The systems can cover things related to legislative requirements, ESG, performance, and all that. You see, that's the important part of this, is now if you spread out to reach more suppliers, you also want to be sure you're getting good suppliers, not just the best price, not just quality product, but you want to make sure that your second and third tier suppliers aren't going to come back and bite you in the behind because they're non-compliant, because that can happen.
Absolutely. And to your point, if that's a directive that you need to hit, and sometimes, listen, it's not all a zero-sum game. You got to push and pull a little bit, right? So when you talk about the diversity supply, you might end up paying a little more, right? Or have some other effects, but you'll meet that diversity requirement. So to that point, you could have a diversity flag, and if they're a diverse supplier, they get 10 bonus points on their scorecard, just because, right? And then you can say that's leveling the playing field, and my end users understand that because we need to hit this requirement. But to your point, and what we were talking about, you need to know that part is available at multiple suppliers, right? And that's, you need to keep them engaged, but you need that data. So there was another view that I had mentioned showing to you, and I know it's going to be an eye chart, but it talks to your point. So I'm going to narrow this down, I promise. So when you have all this data tied together, and this will clear up, like I said, you'll be able to see purchases you have for the same part across multiple vendors, right? So as an example, you can see here that, and some of these you can't tell exactly what they are, so that's fine. I'll pick something with a part number, a motor with a hub, right? It's something we've all seen in our indirect MRO world, right? So we zoom in on this part. It's got a real part number, 280-2012, but you look and there's multiple representations because it's been purchased from multiple suppliers or free texted in by a technician who didn't find it in the catalog or something, right? So what you see here is multiple representations of the same part, and we're buying it from multiple suppliers in this example. So when we zoom in, and again, this stuff is anonymized, so these prices aren't exact, but they are conducive of what's really going on. So if you take a look here, this part is being purchased from 3 separate suppliers, and the prices are significantly different over time. So we start out paying, a little over 400 for this. Price jumps to 500, right? All of a sudden, a second vendor enters the arena, likely because of a sourcing event, because, hey, we need to produce some savings. Now, at this time, you can see that we're still purchasing from both vendors. So again, there's always different considerations. Perhaps this other vendor is regional or more local to other technicians, and they say, you know what? Again, competing KPIs, right? I know you need to save money. I need to fix this thing today. So maybe they're going to this more expensive place just because it's available sooner. But then you can see in 2021, middle of the year, a third vendor enters the fray at a significantly reduced cost, 315. If you talk about cost avoidance, that's potentially $250 a transaction of cost avoidance here. So that's significant. You can see that compliance is better because these go from lines or from dots, lines to dots, I should say. There's less purchases, but you can still see that people are purchasing. We'll call it around the program. You call it Maverick, I'd call it Rogue, whatever you want to call it. The idea is that there's an opportunity cost to transacting from a procurement perspective with this vendor, right? So again, we track this. Your point on negotiating and having those other vendors in the fray is valid. You need to kind of have this active market intelligence ongoing to achieve that. Because otherwise, if you're not actively engaged with these folks, and again, we're working with enough spend where we can engage multiple suppliers, there's enough to go around to at least have this sample. But you could be looking at outdated data. You could be looking at a single source. You could be paying $550 without having the slightest idea it's available for $300, and that's the kind of stuff we're talking about.
Well, what's exciting about this, and I want to assure the listeners on this. In 1998, 2000 for the D&D, and then with the New York City Transit Authority, we identified 2 types of commodity characteristics: historic flat lines, which usually line up, and this is going back more than 20 years, usually line up with direct materials, and then indirect materials, MRO, which were called dynamic flux. In other words, the price not only fluctuated in a day, but overall it would be a steady decline. Now, why I want to point that out, John, and there's 2 reasons. Number one, this is not just new limited time data that's happening just in the window of John's world of doing it. This is now data that's been consistently proven year over year, decade over decade, that those are the 2 characteristics. Now, if you don't understand those characteristics, then you cannot possibly align the right technology and the right approach. And by the way, technology is the third in a 3-step process. There's commodity characteristics, there's process alignment, with which you referred to, John, and then you get into the technology itself. Because by and large, we're no longer in the day of no one gets fired for buying IBM. The technology works. The difference, and we talked about this earlier, John, is that instead of looking at a magic quadrant, and I think they're great, and the company logos, we need to see more of the faces and the people and the background of the people behind the technology who understand this. Because if you don't have that understanding, and interrupt me, correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't have the understanding of the markets you're serving from an operational standpoint beyond the procurement realm, but how it all works, there's no way you're going to identify the service representatives, the field technicians, challenges. There's no way you're going to be able to identify that there's a parent-child skew nightmare out there. I mean,
you're absolutely right. I mean, just to your point, I'm, in my company, I serve as our head of analytics, among some other things. But, when you look at the data and the platform, when we first deployed it, and it was years ago, we're probably 8 or 9 years into our big data journey now, right? But close to a decade. That's pretty good. But we used to almost kind of want to hide that, as a like, oh yeah, we're using this thing, but don't worry about it. And now we're not shy. Yeah, this is our tech stack. We use a cloud data, system to house all the data. We use an analytics platform to provide the visuals and interpret it. If you want to go ahead and try it yourself, go ahead. But we know that you don't have the expertise that we have. Now, you could catch up, but that's why we need to continuously innovate. That's why everybody needs to continuously innovate, because no leader today will remain the leader tomorrow by doing nothing, by just holding pat, right? Yeah. But we're confident enough to say, yeah, we use this software, we use this cloud storage, et cetera, because really, who cares? You can hodgepodge any type, to your point about the magic quadrant. Look, if you pick anything in that quadrant, across any of those different verticals, I'm sure it'll work. But how do you apply it? Do you know the use cases? Do you know how to interpret your business processes to result in meaningful outcomes? That's where you really drive the value. And I think it plays into a lot of the buzz around AI lately as well, right? Like, again, AI is nothing new. You're talking about algorithms from years ago that today people might confuse with machine learning if they're not machine learning, just because there's ambiguous terms that people use and just slap on things, right? But the idea is that whatever it is, whether it's regular old if then logic that's just very extensive and knows your business process well, if it's machine learning, if it's AI, you can't just garbage in, garbage out applies. You can't type garbage into Chat GPT and expect it to write you like a Shakespearean play. If you understand how to use it and its limitations and what you want to do, fine. You could probably make a good chatbot or train it on some documents. But that's the reason that the robots aren't coming for our jobs. They might be changing the way we work because people will need to understand how to interact with these tools, and they'll be powered by the data that we're producing every day. But unless you have a very solid use case, something we've been looking at recently is automatically categorizing items so that they can be routed to the proper vendor immediately, right? It's probably similar to things that you've talked about, but with the added layer of, if there was ambiguity around the part, if I didn't really know what it was, how good would machine learning be at telling me what it was to the point that I'd get it to the right vendor that would provide a quote? That's a really awesome enhancement. But if somebody doesn't understand, this is legitimately the data I get from the technician. No, it's not going to get better. Yes, I've tried. Maybe it can get marginally better, but this is it. Here's the problem. What can we do? If you find a tool to solve that problem, it's going to be way more impactful than just talking big about AI in the grand scheme of things. You need specific use cases and experts to power them.
Well, you see, that's the key thing, and you need the experts to power them. As I was listening to you talk, and we talked about this before, with one of the main military bases, they are called late on a Friday. I'm going to share this story with you, and they're going to say, and this was back in the day where Compaq had a $10,000 tape backup unit for a server, and they called late on a Friday saying we need it delivered by Saturday. Of course, to get that delivery, it would have cost twice as much with the delivery, shipping, and weight. But we understood the parent-child SKU scenario, like you, John, understand all the components. And so what we discovered is by doing a parts compression function while linking the parent and the different SKUs in there, we found out they had 3 of those $10,000 units in their warehouse, and they didn't know about it. And that's what kills you. That's the sign that's like a high blood pressure for procurement, because that's how it sifts through. So again, I want to go back to emphasizing this point is that there's companies that have led with technology. I think it's been always like this. Technology redefine the process and then redefine the way that people work. And talking to the Power Transmission Association, once I told you there's 300 senior executives on the supply side, and I was talking about very much the algorithms of the system, and they're saying pitchforks and torches, because they said we went through all these cycles to get on the approved vendor list, and we're not getting anywhere near the business. In the US, in that industry sector for power transmissions, 37% of the purchases were off contract.
Yep.
In Canada, that was as high as 79%. And they called maverick buying a bad thing. Well, how do you say this to a buyer or someone on the front lines who understands, why would I pay 30% more when I get a product from somebody I know, and just because they aren't on the platform? That's where I think you can call it almost like the what's that restaurant, the Rock one, Love All, Serve All? What is it?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, what you've done with your technology is you've opened up the entire market where there is a high degree of trust, because the data and the algorithms and the information that you employ provides those tools right at the fingertips, and they can be adjusted in real time. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's especially coming at this from the indirect MRO angle, we know that things are out there that exist, things that we expect in the consumer world. They just don't happen when we buy stuff, right? And it's hard not to take it personally sometimes, right? But something that we found, and it's why it's important to have a strategy that while you want to be in a perfect world, you're supplier agnostic, you're okay with whatever gets the job done. You still need some preferred suppliers and some people who are great partners, because to have that integration and those links all the way through the chain and automate and become extremely efficient, you actually bring some of those big players you elevate them. And it's funny to think of little old SDI, right, a small medium-sized company, going to some, I'll just say you definitely recognize them, and saying, hey, we would like to do this. And they say, well, I don't think we can do that. And we say, well, we saw this commercial on TV where you where you do this in your app, and if you could show that in our app, we could give you orders of millions of dollars of business, and we could establish a great partnership. And we don't have a partner in this realm. And that goes from anywhere, home improvement realtors, general industrial, electric, like you name it. There's major companies out there where, number one, just based on their size, you would expect that they know what the letters API mean, or could curate a catalog. You'd really hope, right? But that's simply not the case. I was on the phone with someone, a multi-billion-dollar company in the welding industry a few years ago, and it may have changed. I've been more on the analytics side than the procurement side for a little bit now, but they straight up told me that sharing that information and APIs were not in their roadmap. It's like, what? It's just, it's okay if you don't have it today, but you're telling me you don't plan to do it. So, it's just very interesting. And some of that is just, it feels like the gears of our industry turn slower, and they're starting, but it's amazing to see what you can do when you keep asking and keep trying to, elevate the field.
Well, and I think that's very, very true. I mean, and with companies like an SDI, smaller companies, I was a smaller company. UPS worked with us to streamline the production of the waybills so that small suppliers who didn't have the technological know-how or advances didn't have to worry about that, because once they were picked for fulfilling an order, our link into UPS would automatically generate for them a waybill number with the customs clearance and everything. I mean, perfect. The technology is there. The problem is the know-how. Now, there's a question, John. Has this been done for service SKUs at SDI, standardization of SKUs? And I think that's what we're talking about, the parent-child SKUs. That's what you
yeah. So there's
elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's different ways of doing it, different levels of doing it. We actually track a percentage of data that's cleansed, right? So every business process is different. In general, at SDI, we have two different types of requisitions. There would be a stock item that we know about, it has an SDI SKU, has a manufacturer name and part number. That's most of what we order, but it's not everything. A lot of that stuff is triggered by inventory minimums and maximums, as long as there's an inventory on a site. So in theory, that stuff is seamless. You run below a min-max, as long as your min-maxes are set up properly. It shows up, nothing runs out, and we maintain very high level of that operation. There's also non-stock requisitions, which are the ones the technician can't find it. We've never ordered it before. And we know an MRO, right? Pick your study. A large percentage of things don't get purchased year over year, right? 30%, 50%, whatever number you want to quote. It's a lot, right? So the idea that everything can be stocked, not going to happen. So, right, that's why some of this, improving what we know about items through algorithms, machine learning, AI. Hey, if you give me text garbage, can I interpret it? I mean, obviously, we're not miracle workers. If you just say, I need a wrench, I can't tell you the part number. But if it's hidden in the text, can I pull it out? If I've seen this before, could I tell you it's Klein Tools, right? Because I have that intelligence or something to that effect, right? So when we make that delineation, stock parts as part of an implementation should be cleansed. We have master item records at SDI where we should be able to tell, hey, across all of our clients, we buy that Klein tool at 51 storerooms because we've done that cleansing work. Now, I'm not going to say it's magic. It's a combination of, partnerships in data cleansing, where we'll feed data in and get data back that's been interpreted by machine learning or AI, or in some cases, those won't always be confident, right? So if it's 100% confident, fine, move it on. But if we're not sure, a human might, enter the loop and improve that. We have a whole master data management team that would know better than I. But to that point,
one of the things I want to emphasize what you just said is, and people talk about cataloging, et cetera, and static information. We're not talking about updating catalogs. We're not talking about a database of parts, and then we're dependent upon so many people updating it to give us accurate amounts. You're talking about real world integration and time interaction, that you can capture that information, correct? And that if a supplier that you've designated to potentially have that doesn't have that, it does go into their scorecard, does go into the balance. I mean, that's the whole difference, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it all see, and that's where the data management gets tricky, because when you distribute these to a supplier, as an example, you can search, you can select, you can automate that with search logic. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. And it depends on, again, the company's strategy. We have certain clients that say, I don't want the technician to have the choice. I want a preferred supplier, and that's it. That's how long it takes. Others, they want to empower the end user. So they say, provide them the information, show them the price, show them the lead time. So having that real-time cross-reference, right? It's extremely valuable. You can automate processes. Where it gets tricky is when you, and it does, it's not just catalog management, but you need to maintain a tie to a catalog, which is where this whole universe of star schema diagrams gets crazy, because you need to tie it back to the original supplier part number, because while we can cleanse their data, we can't force them to recognize a part number they've never seen before. So if we know that it's Klein Tools part 123, if that vendor calls it GLN59, that's what I have to send them on a purchase order. I can do all the analysis on the back end. I can make algorithms on algorithms that interpret it, but I need to send them a purchase order they recognize, or my part won't come. Right now, we'll spot those issues on the scorecard. To your point, if I send them an order they don't confirm, or they confirm wrong, yeah, they're going to start having a negative score, and that's going to cause us to have a conversation with them. But through our experience, we've realized that no matter how hard we try, at the very least, I'd call it a Sisyphean task. It's an uphill battle to get a supplier to say, okay, fine, we'll recognize the part you send us, rather than no, this is our part number. That's something
that's really hard, but that's change management of the way they do business. And obviously that's where the algorithms and the sorting come in. Now, remember, we talked about this to the audience, and I hope this answers your question about SKUs, but that's where the expertise behind the technology comes into play. Let's give you an idea here, because there's other savings that come from this. With the New York City Transit Authority, they had a central selling location with huge inventory. The D&D even had more. And what we were able to do, for example, with the D&D, is we were able to compress their inventory level and reduce it by 80%. Now, how did we do this? Because we became more proficient at the sourcing process through the front lines of smaller suppliers. So, for example, we would have a polling process. Requests would come in for a product. The system would automatically look at the location of the delivery point and then go to the nearest supplier who would have that in their strategic stocking location. If it wasn't there, it'd go to a second poll, a third, and then it would go to strategic sourcing. What we found is the majority of organizations are carrying at least 50% more inventory than they have to because of a rainy day. And what they're doing is they're inheriting products that are a depreciating asset, which means the longer they have them on the shelves, the less likely they're going to use it. And remember that example of the compact drives. They had all this money sitting in their warehouse, and yet they're going to order another one. And that's really what you're talking about from your experience, John, is you look at this and you say, we provide the capability to access product on a real-time basis, on a secure basis, dealing with parent-child SKUs. And that ultimately benefits not only the delivery performance, not only the cost performance, but it ripples right on down through of even potentially reducing significantly inventory on hand. Yes? Sorry, you're on mute.
There you go. Sorry, sharing screens got a little hairy there. So yeah, no, you walk directly into something I love to share here. Now, again, these are kind of subsection slices of data. So anonymous again, but this is an example of an analysis we did on a remote location for slow moving and potential obsolete items, right? Now, this goes into both just what you were just speaking about, and previously the rainy day part that you found based on your $10,000 order on the Friday night, right? That's what that was. That was a found part that nobody knew they had, right? So again, when all of these pieces are connected, when you have that control tower view, you can take a slice of the data and say, hey, what do I have that hasn't moved in a long time, hasn't moved in so long that potentially it's even obsolete, forget about being slow, or it has no usage. So look, maybe this is old stock that we had to take into the warehouse for some reason. Maybe we just ordered the wrong part. But what is all this stuff? And again, this isn't going to automatically decrement and trash it. It's going to provide the information to the experts to do what they do. To your point on, having this sort of dead inventory, obviously procurement carries those carrying costs. And, it depends on how it rolls up in the organizations, but finance is always all over this one, right? They're like, hold on, I'm carrying how much money that we haven't used in how long, right? And these types of views and these types of data matrices that we can weave together, they can not only provide these types of just reports, but if this is something that's really important to your organization, or say really important to finance, you can have alerts, right? Hey, let me know when there's over $5,000 of a part that hasn't been used in 180 days. If that happens, you can have your director of finance get an email, and he just says, hey, here's your SKUs to check out for this month. And again, it's just taking it a step further. This data has been out there, but maybe not tied together. Now, if you're in the right place, it's available and tied together, but you still need to take time to look for it, right? So if you can take it that extra step and you can define, okay, here's all this universe of data. I have 100 analytics apps that I could walk you through, right? But what's really important? How am I going to communicate to the COO when he should really care about something because it's a top level concern? How am I going to communicate to someone at a site level that they should care about their site? The answer is scanning your data for those exception cases, right? If you can understand, hey, I might have a potential inventory issue at this site before it's a year old, 2 years old. Maybe you could recognize that this is needed in another facility and transfer it there. So it's not just sitting and depreciating at your warehouse, right? Because again, this should talk across all sites, all locations, et cetera. This sort of, flexibility in your data. One of the best quotes is just, we're only limited to the questions we ask about the data. As long as the data is there and we ask the question, we can keep digging. And that's why I really love this type of analysis. And I think it plays right into some of the points you were sharing.
Well, and what's interesting about this, and I'm going to keep coming back at this.
Yeah,
this is why the expertise behind the technology is more important than technology itself. I remember once saying that, look, you can deal with any company out there today, and their technology is going to be good. It's not going to be buggy. It's going to do it. But it's like what you were saying, that expertise behind it. It's also the ability, and this is maybe where the shift in procurement buyer practices are going to be, is that your skills are going to go from a transactional, narrow focus look to being able to take a more strategic look. I mean, how many people in procurement would love to go back and say, you know what, I can knock down inventory by 25%. How much does that add up? And that's what you're talking about, John, is the AI, the intelligence now requires a different way of thinking.
Yes.
Can give you more powerful results to make that kind of a transition. So I mean, and we also talk about things, interestingly enough, and I'll digress. And I think there's another question coming in, so I'll do that in a minute. I remember landed costs. A lot of times I can remember one large client who would secure the product pricing, but because the shipping came through another department, they bought the product, had the department, and this was a service organization, the other department do the shipping, and then they wondered at the end of every month when they did a reconciliation why their parts, they were losing money on it because the shipping and landed cost of it. And so what this does inevitably too, or invariably, is captures all of the data from across the board. It equips so that shipping, tech, IT, everyone knows what's going on across the board, and it's in the control of procurement. I mean, that's really where we're going now as procurement professionals. I mean, would that be a wrong statement to make?
No, absolutely. And it's why we had a major focus as well in just data evangelism in general, right? I keep coming back to that as well. Is it's just we're producing so much more data. And to your point of working smarter, not harder, focusing more on the strategic tasks, there's so much information available, so much opportunity out there. We'd be better off letting the machines do the dirty work, right? The stuff that they can handle, can't do everything, focusing our expertise on handling the exceptions, analyzing that data, and then understanding how to interact with it. It's why, we produced, it's actually a great companion guide to the research that was shared. And I'm just looking, I don't see my screen share option anymore. So just give me a second here. But it really speaks to the same kind of, here it is. There it is. Sorry. The same kind of thing. It's a companion to the research that SIG put out, basically, and we didn't even know it. But it's essentially an analytics guidebook that we've put out, and this is anonymized, so again, it doesn't show our client data, but it helps understand. These are the metrics at a very high level, and we track hundreds, probably 1,000 metrics at SDI. But the ones that are most critical to an operation, things like cycle count, fill rate, inventory. When we talk about procurement metrics, we were looking at the supplier scorecard as an example, things like on-time delivery, confirmation. And what we're trying to do here is take a profession, and procurement, they've always run market baskets and things like that. So there's some level of Excel savvy that's expected, right? But when you think about the organization as a whole, you're not always hired because you're savvy at Excel. You might be a negotiator, right? Or you might be good at working with the analysis you're given, right? You're not hired because you're a data analyst. So what we're trying to do here is help level the playing field. And you know what? If you're in procurement and you join SDI and you need to have an intelligent conversation with your supplier about on-time delivery, you know what? Why don't we just have access to this where someone can read this intelligently. They can see a sample of a graph. In our internal tool, we have a link to our, live analytics. We don't have this in the version that we distribute, but it just speaks to your point about focusing on value-added tasks. What's more important? Doing an update to a description on a PO that can probably be handled by an automation, or handling an on-time delivery problem because you're not meeting your SLA, right? Very obvious. So,
Yes.
Making this type of information available and showing, people a little bit behind the curtain. I don't think it gives away the sauce, because really, again, go ahead and track on-time delivery. Most people don't have the data for it, or they don't have it written up as an SLA. And even if you do, putting it in the context of the millions of ways that we can slice and dice it with all of our data tied together, I'm confident that we bring a relatively unique solution. But regardless of that, the point is your teams need to know how to handle this data, because we're asking them to deal with it on a regular basis. And we're all so busy. It's very difficult to expect people to just pick up a new skill like that, right? So leveling the playing field a little bit. We've all talked about in the sourcing and also the facilities management and the technician sort of realm, there's that age gap that's increasing. People are retiring and they're not coming into the field at the rate that they're retiring. There's a brain drain going on, right? So if we could take some of that knowledge, it's foolish to think we could take all of it, but any of it that we could democratize and put into a system that these newer folks, the learning curve gets lowered a little bit, it's going to make a real impact in procurement departments of the future.
See, now it leads in nicely to, there's a question that's posed in service supply chains. This information is hard to gather from service suppliers since they carry inventory and potentially charging clients the overhead. Okay, now, first of all, let's take a step back here. We used to see in the service parts, because again, there's no MSRP for service parts. Right. It's open market. It's the Wild West. And we used to see people lowballing the price on the product so that they'd say, oh, we're going to sell it to you for $1, but make money on shipping in other areas where you're not
on the install cost, the service cost, whatever. Yep, exactly.
It's constant all the time. So one of the things to your question with regards to the audience who asked this thing is that we don't gather it from physically, so to speak, give us this information, rely on it. We're going to engage you and send out a request. You can bid, you can do whatever you want, but just so you know, whatever you give us is not just down a narrow scope or we're only looking at 3 people. We can see the entire market. And that's what changes the dynamics. It's what changed the dynamics is why the D&D was able to get 23% savings year over year. Because what happened is streamlining the intelligence. I'll call it that, streamlining the intelligence. Absolutely. Creating a single source of truth, regardless of how many variations or versions there were out there internally. Now, all of a sudden, the suppliers realize, wait, they can go elsewhere. They have a streamlined process for delivery. They can clear customs quickly. And that's what you're talking about, John, providing the single source of truth where you don't have to worry about being charged an overhead, where you're not dependent upon the supplier to keep you updated. They're bidding real time. If they lose, they're going to say, well, how can we win? They've got to come to you. And you can even then give them scorecards, say, well, this is what the price range is. This is what delivery performance is. You in essence tame the Wild West of MRO and tailspin. I mean, is that
nailed it? So the challenge there, it's just like we talked about on the scorecards. It's the partners, right? So we've engaged in ways to systematically collect quotes via email for things like services, and you have some success. You have some folks that just you ask them to bid for labor by the hour potentially, and they just here's the number. Here's what it's going to cost. They just don't do it. It's similar to it's the same type of conundrum. It's just not as far advanced along the maturity scale as units of measure, right? No matter what we do, we're never going to get it perfect. Vendor one's going to call it a bag. Vendor two is going to call it on each. They're going to be the same exact thing. No matter what conversion I put in the system, I'm going to be wrong, right? Or I'm going to need some kind of more intelligent logic than just do it, right? So, I think that speaks to it, but you're right. If you collect the bid information, you have all the information about the job, you are changing the industry. I think it's a challenge. I know it's a challenge to bring them up to speed. That's, some of the service providers are a little slower to change because they know they're making their markup on the parts. They know the cat's out of the bag if they try to share that part, or if they share that part information with you, they know they'll realize it's just like OEM commercialization when you realize it's just a, regular old SKF bearing, and it's like, oh man, well, there goes our 300% markup on that part that they had to buy from us, right? So, it's out there. But I would just say, it's a little bit behind the curve, and you need to find ways to standardize that data. So to your point, if it's bid out as a job, fine, it's better. And some of the ways that we integrate, frankly, with some of our clients through work order management systems, you can link the work done to a work order, and the parts are kind of listed separately. So when you enter the SDI universe, that's when you start dealing with parts. But the work order data, it's tied together, but they're in separate systems. So you could kind of see, well, the labor portion was X dollars, and here's the cost for each part. And to your point, tax and freight and all that are tied in. But that's one of the things that the visibility, it's one of the real benefits to our program when you go full bore with an implementation, is because the ability to see that you're not just getting a quote on a service work order. You're getting a quote that was, here's the service, here's the impeller that you needed, here's the belt, here's the hours of install. And just, again, what am I buying? Answering that simple question opens so many doors, and it includes, to your point, standardization of services.
And you see, you there's one thing that we want to go on the other side, the Pareto principle. You know what that is, 80-20% of the business. You've got to ask yourself, audience, how much of your supply base, what percentage of your supply base is actively engaged in doing business with you? Let me give you an idea in terms of this, because the information you gather can become a useful tool for them. There's a major business organization in Canada, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, small businesses. They won't even touch, let's say, government tenders, because as far as they're concerned, they've automated the process. They say, I can provide A, B, C. They get a notification of an RFP. And as Judy Bratt once said, and she said, if you're just getting involved at the stage of when the RFP is issued, you've already lost the race. It's like showing up to a marathon and expecting to win. And taking even further, when I interviewed, and this is Governor Cuomo, the old Governor Cuomo, when I interviewed his chief aide, he said 95% of all contract wins are decided or really known before the RFP is actually issued. Yeah. So what happens here is what you're doing is let's look at suppliers as a partner, small, medium enterprises. A lot of these companies are, especially with indirect material. You're going to be able to share intelligence with them to help them up their game. You're going to streamline their ability to engage and work with you, just like with the UPS example, John, where they automatically got sent out all the necessary paperwork, including clearing customs, so they could focus upon moving product at a fair and reasonable price, and you, of course, were able to get the right product at the right time at the right price. I mean, that's really where it comes in. This isn't just a one-way street here. The suppliers actually become a partner in this, and I think that's what you do as well. You become a source of insight for the partner.
Yeah, I think we elevate each other. Whether it's enhancing the technology. Again, with the scorecards, we're not trying to be combative. We're trying to say, hey, this is what we expect in a best in class. This is what we agree to. We're not hitting it. How many times have you gone into a meeting and you have a general idea of if your supplier is hitting the mark, but you don't have the data or you don't trust it? And even if you do, the supplier's got different data, right? So the fact that this is transparent and constantly shared, we all agree this is the truth. Let's work on it, right? And it's funny. I find myself talking to our SRM team sometimes, and they love me for it, I'm sure. But guys, this is a scorecard. This isn't a pat on the back. It's okay if someone does bad. We want to fix it. It doesn't mean that we're banishing them. It means that we have an opportunity to improve. And I see that as a win. I don't see that as a negative. So I feel like, again, it's about changing the conversation and elevating our partners. But I think we're trending in the right direction on that.
And you see, the key as well is the distribution of business goes over a wider supply base. Bingo. I mean, and this can apply public and private sector, by the way. I mean, in one case with the Commonwealth of Virginia, they spread out the supply base wins, the number of and out there in the audience, if you haven't, have you ever done an assessment as to who's getting your business, how much of the supply base you're engaging? And you don't have the intelligence to, the information and data readily available. If you're only engaging 20 to 25% of your supply base, chances are there is a lot being left on the table. I don't want to get into a cost thing, but overpaying happens the more you compress your engagement. And that's where this intelligence comes in. Confidently broaden your market engagement and partnerships, both within and external to the enterprise. I mean, that's the way I would sum it up. How about you, John?
I think you nailed it. I mean, to your point, right part, right place, right time. It's not just technology, but it's the people behind it. I think those are the real takeaways. And, just data is being created at such a rate, to your point, we need to start and continue to work with it. That message, it's been around since, since you were doing your thing and well before that, and, in the defense contractors, but it's just so available now. And we're expected to work with it so much that it's changing the way that we work. So if you're trying to prepare yourself and your department for the future, you'd be foolish not to focus on it as one of your absolute top priorities.
Well, and I got to tell you, and you talk about the years, you see it 20, 30 years ago that I was doing this and see it progressing. I think there's a new enlightenment coming with the market, looking at a service provider, because I hear more and more from CPOs that they are not looking at the technology, feature, function, and benefits anymore. They're looking at a service provider partner who understands the intricate working of the business beyond just how the system works. And I think that's really where the differentiator is going to happen for all companies going forward. We've got 2 minutes left. I mean, I could talk to you for another hour, John.
I could too. Maybe we could do this again sometime, but I know these people have meetings to get to, and we appreciate taking an hour with us.
I was just coming on camera as you were saying that. I appreciate you guys carving out your time, John Squared, and all of our attendees. I love the name. But really great insight. I loved how y'all just flow on each other's conversations. So it was lovely hearing you guys. And SDI will be at the Fall Summit. So I'm excited to see you guys in person. For those of you on the webinar, they're newer to the SIG community, but maybe 4 or 5 months in. It's just been such a great partnership. So we're happy to have them as the sponsor. Thank you, John Hansen, for coming and joining and sharing your insight as well. Before we go, we have 30 seconds or so. I put a link to the Fall Summit. So I mentioned the Fall Summit earlier, how SDI will be there attending. If anyone on this call has questions on the agenda, how to register, I'm happy to help you. I see the comments coming in. So people great conversation. Yeah, it truly was. So connect with these folks offline. If you want to talk further. And thank you so much, everybody. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. John, do you have anything else to share in our closing remarks?
All set. Just appreciate the time.
It was just great. We need to do 2-hour sessions, though.
We'll break it up for them.
All right. See you later, guys. Bye-bye. Have a great day.